For Christmas, guys, we'll do some more debunking of feminist gaslighting. In this case, it's this video, Long Live the Hag, by Voice Memos for the Void, right? Because what is this a discussion of? This is a lamentation about women aging out of being able to compete with younger women. And of course, men have to deal with this, but we accept it. Like when male football players reach the age they can't compete with younger men, it's sad, but we accept it, right? This whole thing, where is she, is to say that women shouldn't have to accept it, even though they do. And it's also going to blame somebody else. It's going to blame society for something as natural as aging. So be prepared for the gaslighting. Now, before we start, I want to point something out. Here's a case where women's beauty trumps everything. This young lady, Zara Dar, she said she's a PH dropout to OnlyFans model. Why? Because the degree she was going for was so much more work and offered her so little by comparison to what OnlyFans is. Right? Now let's hear this.
I've dropped out of my PhD. I've cried so much over this decision to quit my PhD, because it's a stressful decision, not that I'm particularly sad about it.
Contradictions already. She's not particularly sad about it, but she cried about it. And it's stressful. It's not stressful. What she's dealing with is her own personal conflict about how she appears to the greater world. It's no problem for her. She does not uh, feel regret about getting rid of her PhD for an easy ride. She doesn't. What she regrets is that people will see the false narrative that women are kept out of STEM is just that, false. It's a victimhood narrative that is not true. This woman was going into engineering. It's something that men usually do. Why do men do it? Because they want the status of a high paying job like that. But women have more status than men at birth. This young lady, pretty young girl, has more status than the richest man around. So she doesn't need it. And she can make more money if she's successful at OnlyFans, right? So why would she do that, right? So she's just going to get in the way, right? She's going to waste her time in a career that is a lot of work and stress. And she's why what should I have to bother with that? She doesn't. So she's actually choosing the right career path for herself. It's simply she doesn't want to admit that, this is women have this easy route. I want you guys to be warned too, because when I saw this on uh, X here, someone tried to say that this was bullshit. This is OnlyFans marketing bait. She is not in a PhD. Well, duh, she's a dropout. AI was used in making this character. Oh, so this is a character, so it's not a real girl? Guys, we can see this not is not AI. Matter of fact, if you look at it, at her channel, Zara Dar, there's all these videos of her talking about, equations. That's an awful lot of work to present an AI, a perfect AI, imagine, on top of it. And it goes back a year. So that's bullshit. So you got to watch out for these people who try to make excuses, right? So let me get that back up. Now, we'll get into this.
The depth and care given to the perspective of said hag is a separate train of thought, but the key thing to note is that the introduction and exploration of the alleged hag's psyche is where our horror and story lies. That is separate from a film which simply places an aging woman as a horrific thing to navigate around. Part 2 is the exploitation.
There's no exploitation. There's no exploitation here. Because this is why I brought this up. This woman is the exploiter. She's going to exploit a bunch of lonely guys who will give her money for free. She's not going to give them anything in return of substance. She's the exploiter. So you've got to realize how to debunk these liars. This is the feminist lie that's always told. It's not even just feminists. Women in general like to pretend this. Fake victimhood. It's all projection. They exploit men using their beauty, and then they turn around trying to put it on the man. Okay.
I've discussed exploitation as a film term before with blaxploitation, but the term generally refers to films looking to profit off of exploiting current trends or niche genres. There's a peak in exploitation films during the 70s, but we can see these subgenres pop up across time. When it comes to hagsploitation, what's being exploited? Given that this subgenre is one of the
Nothing's being exploited by us guys, right? This is a woman's story being told. She can't compete with younger girls. That's the story. For what? The limelight. Right? You got to realize too, she's going to use the word value. It's not value, it's stardom and the limelight that they want. It's entirely about vanity.
Many that peaked in the late 60s and early 70s, these films were being produced against the backdrop of multiple social movements. Most importantly for hagsploitation is second-wave feminism. Although much of second-wave feminism's advocacy seemed more invested in younger women of a working age, there was budding feminist writing that considered the impacts of aging. Susan Sontag in 1972 conceptualized the idea of a double standard of aging. Lillian Rubin's research in 1979 would argue
there is a double standard. When men age out, we're expected to get over it. And when women age out, we're expected to make excuses. And here's the other thing, guys. Our experience of aging out is treated with contempt, right? One thing it's treated with contempt, and the other is our fear is important, not theirs. What am I talking about? One is that people call it a midlife crisis, and they make fun of it. They say, oh, there's that older guy, and he bought himself a sports car, right? They make fun of it. And the women, of course, where are we? We're supposed to take them seriously. Now, the other thing is our midlife crisis is about our fear of our own mortality. We fear death. Women's fear of aging is fear of losing stardom. That's a completely different. This is mountain and molehill right here.
Argue that aging into and past middle age offers women the opportunity to recover or discover for the first time their elusive selves and identities. Although their research was published in the 70s, I would argue that these discussions challenging how
there is no elusive self. You are what you are.
How women are allowed or expected to age were occurring as second-wave feminism was building. Rubin's work focusing on women of a certain age easily connects to some of Friedan's discussions about finding worth outside of housework as explored in her 19th.
Right. And that's why I mentioned this young lady here. Worth out of housework. This lady, she made her decision. She wasn't kicked out of STEM. She wasn't held back by men. She dropped it. It was second rate to the OnlyFans, right? And the same thing with, where is it here? And the same thing with housewives. Women weren't forced in there. They chose it. It was the easy gig. So I don't, This is all gaslighting. This is all bullshit.
1963 book, The Feminine Mystique. All of this is to say, we're at a point in time where women's place in society, specifically in an American context, was being interrogated. While second wave feminism wasn't the best at being intersectional, some piece of this
Yeah, exactly. Women do not like men in general. They especially don't like effeminate men and gay men. They don't like that. And they were more truthful back then than they are now. You know, gay men and minority races are attack dogs for feminists. That's why they're embracing them now.
interrogation did consider how women's societal positioning was limited by age and the realities that contradicted expectations of futility. And at the same time, sexism still exists.
Well, yes, for men. That's who was and still is the victim of sexism. Us guys, not you girls. You were never a victim of sexism, ever. You were never. When you took those housewife roles, it's because you took them. Just like this young lady here dropped out of her PhD. It was her choice.
Although we're starting to name what's going on, we're also operating within a cultural context that views women over 50, over 40 in the cases of some of these films, as past their prime utility. As such,
not utility, past the point where they can compete with younger women. And being the star of the show isn't a utility, it is a privileged position. They're past the point where they can supposedly get a privileged position over younger women, at least, right?
discussing the perspectives of aging women, even while perhaps feeding into negative connotations,
By the way, there are definitely over men because there's not a man alive that wouldn't want to be in this woman's position. Go on OnlyFans, get paid by women just because you're a beautiful guy. We would love that. So women have always been and still are way privileged over men.
emerges as a cultural trend to tap into. Additionally, as these socio-political conversations are happening, many of the well-loved actresses from the golden age of Hollywood are approaching this terminal age range. Women like Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, and Elizabeth Taylor, whose public personas helped establish a standard of femininity, were aging out of that standard. This is
No, it's not a standard. You're either good looking or you aren't. Matter of fact, guys, this woman, young woman here, voice memos, look at her avatar. Her avatar is a beauty standard, the standard beauty, right? She chose that. So there isn't a standard. You either are or you aren't.
is also reflected in their ability to find work or lack thereof, with many lead actresses from exploitation films of the 70s having been in years-long hiatuses due to a lack of roles. To that end,
I don't give a shit about that. This is stardom. They had their time. There's all kinds of male actors that were hot for about 2 or 3 years and then just disappeared. It's the way it rolls, right?
and some would argue that the lead actress herself and this specific wave of beloved starlets who'd vanished from the spotlight is what's being exploited.
No, there's nothing to be exploited. These women did the exploiting. They had long-winded careers spanning years, maybe even a couple decades, like in the case of, Bette Davis. She went strong for years. You luck out and you get a long career in Hollywood. It's just that. It's luck. No one did anything wrong by that woman.
Very much come see the oddities type tease. While I agree that the appeal of a beloved starlet we haven't seen in a while is something that can be and was exploited, I want to move away from perceiving that influence through the grande dame archetype in my analysis. This is in large part because I think the grande dame isn't as prominent as an archetype.
Exploited by who? So You gals are simply telling your story and someone else is exploiting you.
Archetype anymore, but also because what I believe is more pertinent is that the lead actress is over 40 years old. Her cultural capital plays a part here, but more so than her reputation, what's being exploited are our ideas and cultural connotations around life after 40/50. With that,
You got to be aware of those terms they use. Cultural capital. In this case, it equals stardom. Does she get to be the center of attention? This is all vanity and, and self-centeredness.
in mind, I will admit that the height of hagsploitation, like many exploitation genres, is a product of its time. However, I want to examine how newer entries to the genre utilize the hag figure as sculpted by these older films to approach horrific examinations of aging through a gendered lens in a more contemporary mindset.
Again, a gendered lens. This is the gendered lens. When men age out, we have to get over it and accept it. When women age out, well, there's something unnatural about that, right? Someone has to be to blame for this, right?
A tainch bit more context before the
Again, guys, look at the avatar she chose. This is the typical beauty standard she claims. Long hair, big eyes, tiny features. Voice of memos. Why'd you choose this if you complain about this? Why didn't you choose an ugly avatar? Or an elderly one? Because this avatar looks like she's all of 20.
analysis. I got my list of hag films from a couple of different articles, the aforementioned
Hey, I as a man must have forced you to choose that avatar.
Wikipedia page, and my own brain as I aim to find a spread of films across the decades. On the screen are the 9 films I considered, but I really recommend checking out Peter Shelley's book for a list of films from the 60s to around the late 70s if you're interested in finding more. I've also split these films into 3 categories: the initial hagsploitation, aka the original recipe, Death Becomes Her, and contemporary entries. Death Becomes Her is its own category because it's a fairly strong comparison point to the substance, and it's the only 90s to 2000s film I could think of that fit, but if you have some ideas, please share them.
The fear of aging is universal, and it's always. There is no of its time.
Below. At the same time that I was building and watching through this list, I was also watching Agatha all along, and I kept thinking about Maiden Mother Crone. As a note, I'm looking at Maiden Mother Crone as separate from neo-paganism. I think there are, in an American context at least, these cultural categories of being for women based in age that Maiden Mother Crone really succinctly captures. Anyway, what I
Oh, being, right? Oh, I see. You're going to do this. We've been categorized. Again, that's why I'm picking this out over and over again, guys. These categories, they're limited because women limit them. This woman could have stayed doing her PhD. She didn't want to. It was too much work. She took the easy route. You are to blame for your own actions and your own choices.
feel like is presented in older hagsploitation films is that failing as a mother begets haggery. Failing can be literal, often via being too overbearing,
Bullshit. It has nothing to do with producing children. You're either young and beautiful or you're not.
or just failing to appear motherly, failing to fit what you should quote unquote be at that age. As I moved through the list of films, haggery began to more broadly be initiated by way of refusing, rejecting, or again failing to do what's quote unquote expected of you at a certain age. You're supposed to be a docile,
When she says expected, what she means is accept your limitations, like we guys have to.
demure older woman, and you're nothing of the sort. Interestingly, as I looked at more contemporary entries, There's another shift towards focusing on characters whose rejection of middle-age futility manifests as a desire to be perceived as a 20 or 30-year younger version of themselves. While it starts to look a little different over the decades, we can begin our unraveling of the genre with this, the hag's most consistent pursuit, the desire for youth.
Well, yeah, we all desire youth. I don't want to grow old and die and get sickly.
Across the decades, hagsploitation films have almost always carried the message that the person this woman was in the past is not the person she can continue to be.
In other words, she can't be top dog. That's right. She can't. Younger women are going to take her place.
Giving very much girl let it go. It makes sense then that this woman's journey to reclaim something she can never have is bound to be horrifying. But I think where the
Notice she changed it. Bound to be horrifying. That's true. But she went, it's meant to be horrifying. In other words, she's saying it shouldn't be, right? Things shouldn't be the way they are.
these women and their stories also delivers a scare and a cautionary tale type of way. Starting with our original recipe batch of films, there's two entries in particular that introduce more interesting alternatives to just death as a warning. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the seminal text, follows an aging former child star, Jane, tormenting her paraplegic sister, a former film star named Blanche. Jane is the one in this dynamic who desperately wants to reclaim youth, and specifically, she wants to go back to a point in time, which is a desire that's fairly familiar in these older films. More than wanting to be young, a lot of these women want to go back to when life was good.
Exactly. So this character here, she's crazy and alone because she couldn't accept reality. That's why. She didn't have to be, right? She could have had a husband. She didn't want one. She wanted to be famous. Her fame was fleeting as a child, and she could never recover from that. So the problems these women suffer are entirely their own. It's completely internal. No one else can be blamed.
Horror in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane comes in the disturbing things Jane is willing to do to get closer to who she was. By the end, Jane is in a deep state of delusion, arguably
Not who she was, what she had. Recognize the narrative this woman's trying to spin.
psychosis, but I'm not a doctor. But it's horrifying. It's heartbreaking, honestly. The cautionary tale of it all comes through the film ending with this suggestion that this woman is so sick. That's why she wanted this thing. And that's sad. Compare this to Straitjacket, which I mentioned earlier, but this film follows a woman who, having murdered her husband and his lover decades prior, didn't mention that before, is suspected of a series of axe murders following her release from a psychiatric hospital.
This is another thing, guys. When women do crimes, they get put in the psych ward. When men commit crimes, they go to prison, even when they're found out to be mentally ill. That's another privilege you gals have that we don't.
The first entry of the Joan Crawford multiverse of young women hating to see a mature lady winning.
That's projection. It's the other way around.
Of the horror in this film comes in our fear that Lucy, the main character, is going to strike again. We also see a few people getting their heads chopped off, which was truly shocking. But there's also the horror of recently released Lucy trying to reset the clock and be the same woman she was 20 years ago, who is not just someone more willing to Paul Bunyan a bitch to pieces, but also an inappropriate woman to behave as now at her big age. At the end of this film, once the true killer and their tricks are revealed, Lucy is suddenly extremely lucid and demure. This woman falls into place with who she is quote-unquote supposed to be.
Well, she accepted. She accepted she's not young anymore. Yeah. And that's a good thing, but you see it as a bad thing, right?
End message of "you can't do that" is being communicated often through pity,
Oh, it's so sad that you want that thing. You must be sick.
austere redemption,
Oh, it's so good that you realize what you should want and how you should act.
or, of course, death. A lot of these women do die.
So what you're griping about is that you as a woman have to deal with limitations. You have to hear the word no.
For coveting the past. We skip forward in time and arrive at Death Becomes Her, a film which follows, quote, two women fighting for the affections of the same man. They drink.
No, 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 no. They weren't fighting for the affection of that man. They were fighting to own that guy to spite the other. He's not loved for himself. I saw that movie and it was a fantastic movie. It was so perfect at showing female vanity and desire for stardom and rivalry with one another. His character meant nothing to these women other as an object up the other one. The people they cared about was one another.
A magic potion that promises eternal youth with surprising consequences. The explicit desire for youth, and more specifically a return to a former state of being, is presented in a much less trauma-connected way. I will note that Death Becomes Her is a comedy with body horror, more so, and not at all a psychological thriller, so we've got multiple subgenres in the studio with us this morning, but work with me here.
Yeah, that film was great, guys, if you ever get a chance to watch it, because it made no excuses for women's vanity. These women at the end went down. They made bad choices. They thought of nothing but themselves, and they got hell for it.
In Death Becomes Her, there's a connection between youthful beauty and power. Even before we get to the magic potion,
Thank you for admitting that. There's a connection between women's beauty and power. Exactly. Women's female beauty has privileges that men can never experience. Thank you for admitting that.
a failing Broadway star who meets up with her childhood friend Hell, is initially interested in Hell's husband Ernest because of his job as a plastic surgeon. The potential for Mad to cheat time, specifically at that point as a way to remain relevant, makes him appealing to her.
Thank you for admitting that she doesn't care about him as a person. Thank you. That's what made her the villain.
Very clearly this situation of
I want this thing because it will give me power in certain scenarios.
The end message of the story is that
Cheating nature is unnatural and bad.
But instead,
why'd you give that weird voice? Cheating nature is unnatural and bad. So are you suggesting that's a bad message? I mean, what was Frankenstein about? Dr. Frankenstein suffered because he tried to cheat nature. I bet you were all for that. I bet if someone talked to you, did Dr. Frankenstein deserve what he got in the end? You'd probably say yes. Female people, all of a sudden, hey, we can't go that route.
Instead of leading to course correction like in Straitjacket, that revelation results in the women's downfall, literally. The character's situation is horrifying to themselves, but there's also a horrific moral that punishment is a result for one's pursuit of powerful beauty. Notably, in the last scene, Ernest is praised in his eulogy for understanding that true mortality comes from investing in the next generation. Your goal.
That's true, right? That's true. By the way, the character that I forget his name there, played, he was a bit of a scumbag too. But he made his choice of saying, no, I'm going to reject immortality and deal with myself. He became a better person. He was a bit of a scumbag or slime ball, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning, and he improved as a person by accepting. And it's true, the same way with me. Look, as much as I want to live a lot longer, I have my time. I've got to disappear. There'll be someone else younger than me take over, and they'll have their time, and so forth. I can accept that, right? And that's what he did, and that's why he's rewarded. He wasn't rewarded with more immortality. He had to die. might have lived a good life.
Goal shouldn't be personal vanity, but perhaps literally having kids and your legacy living through them.
No, 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 don't do that horse shit. She's trying to make it so like, hey, women are just baby factories, right? The message is to have kids. No, no. The message guy said was that I accept my mortality and live my life the best I can. That's the real message. You got to watch these false narratives, guys.
Which kind of connects back to the maiden mother crone of it all. But there's both a denouncing of Mad and Hell's quest for eternal youth, without like a recognition of why beauty is power for them, and a promise of eternal suffering in a way for them. You didn't get the thing you want, you're stuck in this flawed, altered form, and you'll be unable to use it the way you intended. It is maybe at this point that it's worth noting how noxiously written by men all of this stuff is.
Okay, see, it had to be noxiously written by men because the bad people who were female got their up and comings, right? You know, a woman writes it like this one. She's going to talk about the substance. Woman writes it. She still comes off as a subhuman, but nevertheless, we're supposed to feel sympathy for her.
Part of this is a statistic inevitability, albeit not a completely hopeless one. A fun anecdote about Ma is that it was written because Octavia Spencer approached her friend and said, I want to be in something really fucked up. And that's what he came up with.
I got this backwards. Ma is actually very 1970s exploitation coded in its origin story, wherein somebody wanted to make something fucked up and then reached out to an actress who hadn't had many lead roles as the lead for this fucked up film. But I'm keeping this anecdote in here because I think it's interesting to see.
Didn't get many lead roles. So again, this is all about wanting to be a star, to be the center of attention, to be adored and worshipped. Remember, guys, our fear of aging is the fear of death. Theirs is the fear of not being center stage.
That dynamic continue.
But perhaps some of that earlier feminist theory we talked about isn't being digested so much as it's simply opening doors for different conversations and different audiences to target. The lack of haxploitation films written.
What's there to converse about? We're all aging, we're all going to die. We either accept it or we don't.
By women is one of the many things that makes the substance such an interesting entry to the list. While I think there can be heightened expectations for marginalized creators that leaves less room for grace, on the positive side, I think there's also a level of care and attention provided in perspective that's instrumental to storytelling. Similarly to Death Becomes Her, where the main character wants to stay relevant, the main character of the substance wants to change how she looks to still be valuable. But the substance...
No. They both want stardom. They're both the same character, and they won't both want the same thing. So what's she doing? She's switching up words to try and say one's different from the other. One wants stardom, the other one wants to be relevant. But what's her relevance? Stardom, right? The character that Demi Moore plays, she can simply retire and live a good life. What she wants. She wants to be the center of attention. That's no different than Death Becomes Her.
Substance does a better job of building out the environment that establishes Elizabeth's need to change. It's not just vanity, but working in an industry...
No, it's nothing but vanity.
that runs on youthful beauty. I think it's also important that the substance, as in the product, promises a better self, and for Elizabeth that is a younger self that takes the form of Sue. I did kind of bump up on the sci-fi mechanics because Elizabeth is repeatedly told that she and Sue are one, yet neither can recall what the other is doing when the other is in control of their shared conscious. So I had questions about how/if Elizabeth was living vicariously through Sue. Regardless, Sue does not just reflect enviable youth. Her existence is the embodiment of a pursuit of youth that comes at one's own detriment. Even while seeing the act of harm being done to her body, Elizabeth rejects initial opportunities to stop using the substance.
Exactly. This is entirely her own fault. Her downfall. This is an internal struggle, which she failed. In Death Becomes Her, the male character succeeded, and he was rewarded. All the female characters here failed, and so they suffered. The messages are actually good.
Arguably, her refusal to stop is because of a satisfaction rooted in the attention this other version of herself can get.
Exactly, the attention. Right.
Horror comes in all of the complications that arise when she continues to use and abuse the substance. By the time Elizabeth not just realizes but comprehends the damage that is coming with this continued use, it's kinda too late for her. There's nowhere to go but down. The end message of this wild ride is one of self-love, for lack of a better term. Turning yourself inside out isn't worth it. And something too that I think is interesting is the infusion of comedy, of like allowing both in this film and Death Becomes Her to infuse
not just self-love, acceptance that you're not a top dog. Matter of fact, that's what's really going on here.
some levity into the examination of something that can.
These characters are full of self-love. The Demi Moore character, you don't see any relatives in her apartment. You never see any friends or co-workers or boyfriends or husbands. She's alone because she desires to be alone. She is nothing but self-love.
Feels so stressful and crushing. While the substance continues in the generic tradition of pushing characters towards a recognition that a pursuit of youth comes at a great cost, one that's not really worth paying, Elizabeth's spiral happens.
What do you mean generic? As what else could it be?
In a unique state of solitude. Admittedly, I think there is a conversation to have about characters being more isolated in media post-lockdown in general, but Elizabeth's solitude is a stark difference to other haxploitation movies.
Yeah, her solitude has to be that way for the story to go where it wants to go. If there was someone else living in that apartment, they would try and stop her from doing what she's doing. So it's necessary for the story. However, it also shows you that this woman is completely self-centered. A woman who's that beautiful is alone because she desires it. Even up here, she's still attractive.
Rarely in these older films does the main female character exist in isolation. In the films that I watch, the driver's seat is the closest exception to this pattern. The conceit of that story is that the police have to piece together what happened to this missing woman by interviewing multiple strangers because she spent the day alone. We flip between the investigation and traversing Rome with Lise, the main character, comparing what actually happened to what the police are able to piece together. Although Lise is an explicitly lonely character, we're still able to watch her interact with others. Lise is treated.
Yeah, so she can interact with others, and yet she's lonely. Again, if a woman's alone, it's because she desires it. It's her own fault.
As a receptacle for the desires of everyone she comes across, irrespective of age or gender. People make assumptions of her based on her appearance and then proceed without shame. Interestingly, every man she meets sees her as someone to violate.
See, violate. In other words, this woman sees men's sex as violation, as opposed to intimacy or just wanting to be with her. It's not just desire, it's violation, right? So this woman's alone, even though men want to be with her. So just goes to show you what it just reinforces everything I'm saying over and over again.
Perhaps with the exception of Andy Warhol and that wig. But more importantly, we're given the opportunity to understand Lise in comparison to the other women she interacts with and how they all move through the world. Whether these are more modestly dressed, motherly older women or stylish, carefree younger women, we consistently get the messaging that Lise sticks out because she doesn't match.
What are you talking about? She's dressed very ordinary. The only thing that stands out about her is her wild hair.
figuratively and literally. Also, for what it's worth, Lise isn't solely a receptacle for interpretation. She rejects or dismisses the older women who glob onto her and bemoans the behavior of the younger women.
So she has older women glomming onto her. So notice that this woman is getting around. She doesn't have a job. How is she taking care of herself? She isn't. Other people are taking care of her. They meet her, like her because she's female, and then they assist her. Men wish they had this kind of empathy.
She willfully sticks out. And despite the fact that Lise spends her story fairly alone, the driver's seat continues in the vein of other exploitation films wherein women's interactions with each other are used as a way to explore competing ideals for womanhood or femininity. Often this is explored through an older woman viewing a younger woman as a competitor, unless again you're watching a Joan Crawford joint, in which case the younger woman is more likely to be the source of any issues, or the film will present a woman as living in a state of misery and wanting to add more people to it. The idea of competition and miserable company continues in Death Becomes.
Yeah, it really doesn't paint women in a good light. That's true.
Her, where the joke at the end is that Mad and Hell, as lifelong rivals, will only have each other as companions for eternity, if, you ignore the whole legion of immortals. These images all dance around the idea of terminal spinsterhood, more Patty and Selma than Miss Abernathy, you feel me? It's actually kind of interesting to think of this contradicting message that failing to become a mother or wife leads to spinsterhood, and yet spinsters always have each other at the least.
Yeah, it's not contradictory then. It just means that women don't want men. That's why they have each other. They actually prefer each other's company.
Any rate, Elizabeth's complete removal from society in the substance is a very stark turn.
No, she wasn't removed. She avoided it. She's alone because she put herself there. She didn't want to walk amongst the masses.
Arguably, her extreme isolation is part of the message. Elizabeth was easily consumed and more easily disposed of.
No. She was not consumed or disposed. She she was the exploiter. She had life on easy mode by selling her beauty for a long time. That character had a career decades long, living a life that guys wish they could. No, she was the consumer. And that consumption came to an end. And now she said to herself, this is just wrong. I can't be queen for a day. It's got to be for eternity.
Also falls in line with the critique the film is presenting of questioning an institution that doesn't put much care in women beyond chewing them up.
There is no institution here. There is no institution. That's again, guys, like the football league being an institution that grinds up guys. When you reach 45 and your bones are busting, they should just keep you on the field. Who are they to say you're too old and you have to retire? Right? Yet when guys are like this, these same women here expect you to overcome it by accepting it.
Up and spin them out. But I found it really jarring that nobody, not even her agent, cares when Elizabeth disappears for weeks. Having Elizabeth remain confined really siphons off a lot of exploration of who she could be, currently is, and once was. Perhaps
she couldn't be anyone different than what she is. She hasn't done anything but live off her beauty. This is who she is. That's just like the PhD girl who dropped out. This is who she is. Right? So again, you're saying society is roping this woman into some kind of path. No, she has chosen this path.
Because she's almost always alone, Elizabeth mostly externalizes thoughts on her hatred of Sue. The film leans heavily on the competitive aspect of hagsploitation in this sense, but in a twisty-turny, internalized type of way. The woman Elizabeth is competing with is herself, or more specifically, an idea of herself made real. However, it's not just character development that's limited by this stark isolation. We get a truncated exploration of the system of consumption that is not only critiqued by this specific.
No, no, no. Again, there's no system of consumption. This is a woman who had a great life and she could retire and remain having a great life. This is her choice. What I say, guys, what's the other one? Dorian Gray. Here we go. Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray was the male version of this, and he came crashing down because he couldn't accept. And everyone who read this novel recognized that he was the villain of the story. There was none of this horse shit that this woman's prancing and dancing about for him. There are double standards for us guys.
Film, but is also at the heart of hagsploitation as a genre, one where personal worth is connected to how easily you can be consumed.
No, no, fuck off with that bullshit. They aren't being consumed. Her career just reached its end point. That's it.
In conjunction with consumption in hagsploitation is personal worth as exemplified through social cultural capital.
False.
I'm using social or social cultural capital here the same way that one would use financial capital, as in this is a resource that you can use to get things that you want, but I recognize that social and cultural capital are words that don't mean those things. And that
But still, you're being honest. Because these women do get what they want through their social capital of being beautiful and female.
the way that I'm using them is not the way that they are meant to be used.
Do people remember you? Are you respected? Are you pitied? If you went missing in Rome, how much difficulty would the police have in tracking you down? How are you cared for, if at all? Hagsploitation often explores that question based on if this woman is still considered worthy, and what happens when you age out of the thing which brought you worth and illustrious.
Not worth, stardom. The character and substance had worth. She's even going to show it later. She's going to show that some guy went apeshit over her and wanted to date her. Her worth hasn't disappeared whatsoever. She just can't be adored by the masses. That's all.
Illustratively, now people don't care about you. As The Substance is a film about a fading celebrity, it only
Don't care about you, that you're not in the spotlight.
makes sense to compare it to the film that sparked the whole subgenre, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. As a reminder, this film follows an aging former child star, Jane, tormenting her paraplegic sister, a former film star named Blanche. Notably, Jane has been forgotten by the sands of time, while Blanche continues to be a beloved actress who receives a revitalized wave of fans after some of her old movies start airing on TV at the start of the film. Jane
So it was revitalized? So her career wasn't even over then, was it? Kind of contradicts everything you've been saying.
and Blanche are our initial answers to the generic question, what happens when you age out of what brought you worth? For
The
them,
thing is, Baby Jane was also a child actor, right? So her aging out wasn't even becoming elderly. It wasn't even becoming middle age. It was just becoming an young adult. There's all kinds of child stars that suffer that. She doesn't really fit this genre that you're pretending exists.
worth is based in fame. It's fairly easy to visually glean an understanding of how the sisters feel about the past and their current social capital. Jane is trying to regain power and money, and the only way she knows how is through the tap dance routine from when she was 7.
In other words, she never built anything about herself. No skills, no knowledge. She never worked for anything. Okay. That's her fault then, isn't it?
Last time she was consumable enough to be profitable was when she was a little kid doing vaudeville routine.
Not consumable, wanted, desired.
As such, her attempt to return leads to a physical change that is garish, childlike, and inappropriate. On the flip side, although Blanche hasn't acted in 20 years, she maintains a demure allure that's seemingly connected to her on-screen persona. If anything, she shifted to being desired as an elusive star.
Thank you. Desired as a star. Thank you. So it's not personal worth.
Though I'd hazard a guess that Blanche would have only remained desired as so long as she kept to this polished persona. The twist at the
Okay, well, that's the difference between being a star and being someone you know and is intimate with, right?
end of the film opens up the potential to challenge our ideas of who we sympathize with, but the initial idea, the one that runs through the entire film, is that the well-adjusted sister whose persona remained beloved and easily consumed has more social capital and worth than the sister who stopped being entertaining once she hit puberty, and that lack of being desired for her entertainment value has deeply damaged Jane. For the substance, the answer—
Well, she couldn't accept it. The thing is about a child actor or star is that when they age out as adults, they're not elderly. They're not old. Their life has just begun. They can't continue with it. Again, that is a tragedy, but problem lies within them.
answer to what happens when you age out of the thing that brought you worth is similar with regards to the damage done by a loss of value. Elizabeth learns that she's considered washed up at 50, she invests in a way to access a more desirable body, and then spirals as she grows to hate that body and what it does to her own. She has a similar reaction as Jane in a zealous desire to reclaim youth as a means of regaining worth. Yet Elizabeth also—
regaining stardom. I got to correct this woman every time, guys. We got to hammer this home. This is about a woman's vanity, not self-worth.
also has a similar allure as Blanche in being a star loved for decades. However, the social capital that Elizabeth has built evaporates as soon as she steps out of the studio. She crashes down from her pedestal with an impact that I would liken to a feather dropping onto a pillow. She don't make no noise. The fleeting glimpse of any lasting pull her social capital might have comes in the form of a man who's been coveting her since high school.
Now, listen to her language. This guy's desire for intimacy is called coveting. That's what they say when you want something that you don't deserve to want. This is not yours. You don't deserve it, so you're coveting it, right? So here's a guy who's offering again. He values her, right? So the woman has worth. She just doesn't have stardom. She just doesn't have admiration of the masses. Yet this young lady, of course, sees this guy as a part of the problem.
I'm of two minds about this guy. On one hand, it's scathing to have a character's social, cultural capital get boiled down to only having weight amongst a goofier version of Day One Harry Dubois. But
amongst low status men, it sickens this woman that a man who values her is a single low status man. She has contempt for men. The average man is a peasant to this woman. Right.
on the other hand, it's a testament to this woman's social cultural capital that she's lingered in someone's mind for so long. It's a little diluted because this guy knows her from before she got on screen, but regardless, the longevity of Elizabeth's cultural impact—
It's diluted? Wouldn't that make it more genuine that he appreciated her before she was a star? See, there is no winning with man haters. What's your name again? Voice memos. There's no winning. Everything is to blame. Anything guy does is bad. The man is bad, even though that was a good person. That character, male character, was a good person who loved her for who she was, or at least liked her, right? But he's scum, and this woman who is, let's face it, a disgusting person. We're supposed to feel sorry for her, and her aging out is a problem not of her own, not of nature, but society, right? The system, the system, right?
Image is brushed away quite quickly. Elizabeth's cultural image is also in large part dependent on the visual shortcut of casting Demi Moore. But within the narrative, the weight of Elizabeth's long-standing influence in the collective memory is so ephemeral and loses impact again almost immediately. If this woman was in the minds and hearts of many for years, I think we should have some exploration of the toll that has on her, beyond I've lost value because I'm no longer attractive and I have to get that value back. We
No,
don't
no, no. This isn't just attractive. This is mean my star power has waned. That's it. My star has waned. And people have to deal with that. Famous people have to deal with that.
get a good grip on how Elizabeth is viewed beyond being an object.
And yet,
No, no, she's not an object. She's the one who does the exploiting. These beautiful women do the exploiting. This woman had a chance to have a great career and she dumped it to exploit men on OnlyFans. Get it right. Or at least I should say, be honest. Something you can't expect from a feminist.
That's very much the point. The fact that this woman evaporates from public consciousness is very much the point. We are focused on how she is viewed and how these limited external opinions have impacted her sense of self to the point at which she can't think or care about anything else. It's very direct.
Not sense of self, her vanity. She wants to be center stage. That's a privileged position. It's not earned, it's not meant to be there for us. Everyone's star rises and falls.
Correct. But it's also a bit repetitive, in my opinion. A tangent.
You are repetitive. Like her videos over 40 minutes long. Should be half that time.
If you would indulge me for just a moment. I think the best scene in this film, i.e. when Elizabeth struggles to get ready to go out for drinks with Harry Dubois Jr., is so impactful because it's one of the few times we are shown Elizabeth as someone who is more than a vessel for objectification, willing.
She's not, I reject objectification 100%. It's a bullshit, lying term. So going out to dinner with this guy was objectification? No. He offered her a chance to get on with her life, to accept the fact that her star had waned and was over. Her fame was gone. She could have accepted that. She refused, and that was the beginning of the end for her. She got what she deserved. Memos.
Or otherwise. We get some externalization of how she sees herself now as a 50-year-old woman by the way
As a has-been.
she struggles to even try to connect with another person when she's been removed from her carefully.
She's not struggling. She doesn't want connection with this guy. She's just like you. A low status man makes her puke, makes you puke. That's why you talk to him like he was pond scum. Or I should say, talked about him like he was pond scum.
Constructed position as someone to covet. She can't perform a familiar role anymore, so who is she now? We don't get to see that deeper unraveling.
Well, if he's coveting her, wouldn't she also be coveting him? If they're going on a date, right?
of Elizabeth much. Instead, the film focuses a lot on her self-loathing via her hatred of Sue. If anything, and to the film's credit, the narrative spends a bit more time poking at the system by doing this than it pokes at.
Again, there is no system. No, no, no. There is no system. That's why you hated Death Becomes Her, because they were honest about what this was. Like you said, it was a male writer, and the bad women got what they deserved. They got what they deserved by their choices and their actions. This woman also got what she deserved. But because a woman wrote it, we're supposed to think, oh, this is a tragedy. Someone did this to her.
Elizabeth's damaged sense of self, albeit in a similarly repetitive way. Honestly, the repetition of a pretty simple message is what makes the claims that this movie was misogynistic and objectifying so bonkers to me. The scope is so narrowly focused on critiquing the system of beauty as current.
No, no, again, there's no system. That's why you don't consider it misogynistic. The people who called it misogynistic called it because it showed female nature in a bad light. And the sad part is the bad light came from a mirror. This is a mirror held up to the face of women. Here is a real life example. A young woman chose the path of easy beauty, easy money and fame through beauty to gaining a career. That's a fact.
Can see that the film low-key strips away any exploration of anything else. And I say that.
Well, what else would you explore? This is a fear of aging. That's what it's about. What else would there be?
Very neutrally, but I do wonder, how do you miss the point when that's the only thing being said? Let's take this tangent a little bit further. Walk with me. So Slave Play, Stay With Me Babe, is a 2018 play by Jeremy O. Harris. It follows 3 interracial couples going through some kink-based race-centric therapy. The specifics aren't important here. What is important—
discussion of sexual assault, right? And who's doing it? It's the guys, right? And they're couples. So it's more demonization of the male gender, right?
is that during the last act of the play, which is all one scene, a character—
the only connection this has is that this is more man hatred. And that's why you're talking about it.
is assaulted by her partner. And as this assault is happening, the backdrop curtains on the stage part and reveal a mirror. The audience then has to watch their own reaction in conjunction with what's happening on stage. I think the substance, in a more tasteful matter, is doing something similar when it comes to its exploration of objectification and how women's bodies are presented.
Again, this is an objectification. That doesn't exist at all. What this is the same as Dorian Gray. This woman couldn't accept that she was aging, and she had to move on and let younger people come and take up the mantle. She couldn't accept it, and she destroyed herself.
Media. The film is presenting us with something really gratuitous and demanding that we reflect on our reactions to it. Specifically with regards to Sue, everything from egregious camera angles to Mr. Jumbo Shrimp as a character, to Sue not even being able to speak, but because she smiles, the shareholders are happy in the end.
Oh, I see. So this woman gets an easy ride and stardom off of showing off her body, just like women do in real life. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for her? For the privileged lifestyle men would kill for? Screw you.
And is holding up a mirror and telling us to look at the damage done by this.
Nonsense. These women could just leave this. No one's forcing them to be a star or fight for stardom. She could get a real job, right? Just like this young lady. She could have stayed working for her PhD. No one forced her to drop it. Right? And that's why they tried to say this was all fake, everyone. Because it fought the narrative, the lying narrative that people like you push.
This cultural standard of beauty as currency, of consumability as worth. Look at how unsustainable and dehumanizing it is. Look at who profits from it. Look at how much you enjoy it.
Yeah, these women profit from it. Remember the character. I don't know what her name is in this story. She had a long career where she's incredibly wealthy and the center of attention for decades. She profited from it. She did. And she could have retired and lived a great life.
And if that's not obvious enough, there is a whole scene where the final form of Elizabeth and Sue's meddling with nature, poor sweet monstro Elizasue, stands on a stage and an audience is forced to look at her, excuse me. But returning to this question, what happens when you age out of the thing that brought you worth? The answer doesn't.
No. When you age out of the thing that brought you fame, the answer is you have to accept it. That's right.
Often move beyond resentment of an aging body and the coveting of a younger one. I'm a girl. Notably, the substance does go further to provide a decent amount of ew at the older body, which makes sense given this film is a body horror. There has to be something to be grossed out about beyond Miss Girl's spine cracking like a McRib. But when thinking about what viewpoints we as the audience are being asked to question, I'm not as confident that the substance is as strongly pushing us to challenge how we look at older bodies.
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of young guys who would shack up with Demi Moore at her age in a heartbeat. It's called hag maxing. Young guys who can't get women their own age, they aim for older women. They're willing to accept them. And Demi Moore, she's not 50 in this, even though in the film she's supposed to be 50. She's actually 60. And there'd be young guys who were 30 years old who would shack up with her in a heartbeat. Right? So she has all kinds of worth. Right? She just can't be top dog.
I do think the substance is encouraging, especially women over 50, to find self-worth and value outside of a system that'll push them to destroy themselves, which is more.
Again, there's no system involved. I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm repeating myself, but this woman just repeats the same lie over and over again.
More than I think any other exploitation film has done beyond providing a level of shame, judgment, or outright disgust. But it's interesting to me that the horrific, monstrous body is so rarely a young one, like an other mother situation, but she's trying to upsell you on a Pilates class, girl. I don't know. I'll give the substance credit that there are moments of horrific decay with Sue. However, the older woman's body is still presented primarily as something to be disgusted by or to laugh at. When Elizabeth suddenly gets the strength of a great typhoon and, despite having aged rapidly, can drag her tether through the apartment like a chew toy,
Well, it's aging that kills your youth and therefore your beauty. What can I say? And female beauty is her power and her privilege. Yeah. That's why.
people in the theater I was watching this in laughed because it's so fucking absurd. And also, like, it's a black comedy, girl, you can laugh. But most of Sue's body horror moments interrupt scenes where the camera is ogling her. She's about to hook up with this guy and she gets a violent nosebleed. She's dancing at work and a bone pops out. We have these moments of visually devouring.
The camera isn't ogling her, she's showing off her body.
Her that are shattered by shock horror. I think at least a narrative equivalent for Elizabeth would have been something like her finger necrosis popping up while she's trying to get another gig. As much as one could argue that the presentation of Elizabeth's old body can reflect her negative self-image, it also becomes an oddity in and of itself that's almost separate from Elizabeth. And arguably all of this goes back to my mirror tangent. If you laughed at Elizabeth cosplaying a fairy tale kitchen witch, maybe you missed the point that this lonely and vengeful version of self is actually terrifying. But the energy given to challenging our propensity to be barking at the screen, foaming at the mouth for a young type body, the ability to set us up with a familiar image and then disturb our expectation isn't as potent.
I just want to remind you guys, our desire for youth is life. Their desire for youth is stardom.
When it comes to reevaluating how we view aging bodies. And mind you, older exploitation films struggle or fail to explore this as well. It's just that their disgust is explored more narratively than visually, which I think we see through the common three endings for older women: dead, pitied, or redeemed. In the decades since the initial exploitation film, and with various infusions from other genres, one trait remains at the center. You either die a hag or live long enough to become a crone. The options have remained fairly limited.
It's true. We all grow old, and we all have to accept it.
But the morals have shifted and become a bit more compelling.
No, there's nothing, there's no morality in this, right? But you either, well, the moral, there is a moral that if you can't accept the inevitable, you're only going to suffer. That's the moral, right?
Additionally, in contemporary films, we also get a hag who is more accepting of her fate and whose story exists with the potential to consider something more. I think this is best and perhaps unintentionally presented at the end of Death Becomes Her.
Is one man who will indeed live forever. Blah, 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 blah.
Eternal melting aside, there's a message to pull that you cannot return to a version of yourself that was easier to swallow. You'll be sharp and strange and burn all the way down. And maybe that's not a bad thing.
It's been argued that hagsploitation is an innately insulting term. I don't disagree. The moniker is...
Then don't use it. You said yourself you haven't heard of it before. I haven't heard of it till now. Don't use it. Use another term that isn't insulting. Either way, women have to deal with aging just like we guys do.
Is definitely an intentional choice meant to deride women of a certain age, and as such, I think any analysis of these films should question if the narrative is laughing at the lead actress or laughing with her. But I also think it's kind of a circular comment to...
Well, they're not laughing at all. It's a tragedy. What happened to Baby Jane is a tragedy.
Because we're talking about films within a subgenre that hinges on less than favorable expectations, be they cultural or literary, of women over 40. So without spending time questioning if the potentially offensive term is meant to offend,
we can dive into what to reap from these films. Is the story or the visuals or both setting up familiar dynamics and shattering them or reinforcing them? Can we apply a theoretical lens that allows us to pull from the sinews of story some shifted idea towards aging and beauty, intentional or otherwise? Can we cult classic this thing into something that...
What would you shift it to?
Feels more affirming. Some of these films are rough to examine, but others in the genre...
Well, it is affirming. You mentioned one of the three. She accepted. That was the affirming. She accepted that she was older, she can't compete with younger girls, and she got on with her life. That's the affirming part.
Especially as we move forward, are providing some reevaluation of our perceptions around aging, even if it's primarily by way of unsettling us as the viewers.
Mind you, that doesn't make these films free from criticism. The intentions of the substance, for example, are very clear and effective, but I also think that being provocative won over exploring some of what's presented a bit deeper. However, that imbalance is perhaps just...
Again, they couldn't explore. There's nothing to explore, and there's no depth. It's Dorian Gray. Look, all the depth was in Dorian Gray, right? It was all about, will this guy change his ways and choose a better path? He didn't. He suffered from it. Everyone sees him as a villain. They don't really see him as a tragedy, right? Because he was a bad person who made his own choices, and so are the women in the substance, and Death Becomes Her. They were bad people, and they got what was coming to them.
just as foundational to the genre as the hag herself. The key to examining our opinions on aging, to go further and challenge our over-reliance on beauty, is perhaps simply to witness the refusal of expectations. Whilst I was writing this, Halle Berry was quoted in an interview as saying she's longed for someone to say something to her other than "you're so pretty." In the
Well, she should have cultivated something beyond that then.
same clip, she's discussing her desire to be a spokesperson for aging gracefully, and she says that unrealistic expectations can turn women into monsters. And I was like, did you just watch The Substance, girl? I didn't watch the whole thing, so that would be actually very funny if that's literally what they were talking about. But I found this idea of wanting to age in a way that doesn't overly fit on an ideal so timely for two reasons. Firstly, the lily white elephant in the room. This subgenre and many of the films that fall within it are whiter than freshly fallen snow.
Yeah, that's right. White women rule. The idea that feminists were inclusive to race is bunk. Race and gay men and transgender, it's bunk. You know, the gays, the trans, and the racial minorities, they were cannon fodders and shields. It's to say we, these white hate women, sorry, we white women were part of this hate movement, look how inclusive we are, right?
Arguably, that's the most second wave feminism thing about this subgenre, but my point is that it's not lost on me that the standard of beauty being built up, weaponized, and deconstructed is
No, 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 no. No, there's no standards of beauty. You either are or you aren't. That's why Paul pointed out your avatar. It fits all the standard beauties. That's the way it is. It is being weaponized, but it's not being weaponized by men. It's being weaponized by women to take advantage of it. Okay?
one specifically tailored by and for white women. Ma, as the lone entry of color to the hags list, isn't a strong contender for applying the intersection of race to this pursuit of youth. The best, and I use this word lightly, we get is a scene where Sue Ann coats the black teenager's face with white paint and says there can only be one of us. But although hagsploitation films are 8.5 by 11, or A4 for my international listeners, kind of white, the pressure of maintaining a flawless, ageless level of beauty is pervasive. Secondly, this interview popped up as I was initially trying to process thoughts around the dissonance of having a character with low self-esteem be played by a famously gorgeous woman.
Kind of like in the Barbie movie when Barbie's crying about not being perfect or pretty enough. I can't remember which one. And the narrator breaks the fourth wall to say, maybe don't cast Margot Robbie if you want this to be an effective line. Now,
oh, by the way, you know what I loved about the Barbie movie? When women went to see it en masse, when they came out, all they had to say about it that they loved was the Ken character, the male character. He carried that film. He made it enjoyable. I'm trying to remember the guy who played him. But he put it all into it and just made it as funny. That every female relative I know that went to see that film and came out, that's what they were talking about, Ken. Because you know something? The feminist lies don't mean anything to women. Women know that they're lies. And so they're not coming out of the film and saying, oh, Margot Robbie, the Barbie, she really spoke to me. No, they said, oh, she's just spewing the lies I want them to spew. But the male character Ken made me laugh.
Now, I know pretty people have problems too, and there's also undoubtedly a different kind of stress that comes with the expectation that you'll always show up looking gorgeous. But I liked Halle Berry's interview shining a light on how reductive it ultimately is to view a woman as only being beautiful. What's complimentary is inevitably isolating, even if we perceive it to be a good, positive, reinforcing thing. It's just detrimental.
Well, that's your issue, dude. Lady. becomes something else. The thing is, there's no worth to it. Again, like this proves no men are keeping women out of STEM. Women aren't interested in it. A long, hard haul during a career does not produce what women have by nature. It's that simple. Voice memos.
So much more. The multiplicity of man is so much more than just if your face is symmetrical, you know?
Yeah, of course. Because men are tossed away if we don't prove ourselves useful. That's why you don't have guys who can get away with dumping their PhD in engineering. And also, men have zero sexual power. They can't be a part of OnlyFans and get paid by women just for existing. Men have to achieve or we suffer. That's why there's a multiplicity, as you say.
There's also something positive to be said for having famously gorgeous women be at the forefront of aging, from the gracefully realistic to the fantastically horrific. These women can shift from being points of comparison to being someone a viewer can maybe more easily connect with. Haxploitation itself has always provided
So you don't want to see an ugly old woman. Gotcha.
the potential to see beloved stars contend with the great equalizer, time. Regardless of how it's done, perhaps providing the space to openly
The great equalizer between the genders. Women are privileged over men in almost every way, but they have to die like the rest of us, like us guys, right?
discuss the aging process is enough to encourage major milestones to feel less daunting because they're being tackled together, or at least being framed as fucking bananas.
Yeah, whatever. I'm not going to bother with her silly conclusion or whatever it is. It's been a long haul. I really wanted to cover a long video. Someone suggested me maybe I should do a longer video. This is it. And I'm going to end off saying again, guys, this woman talks about beauty standards, and this is her avatar. Again, there's no beauty standards. You either are or you aren't. And other than the darker shade of skin, this character, this avatar, is no different from the white women. Okay? Now, we'll end it here. Bullshit debunked.